Getting the sense of what we're talking about?
Kind of.
As we move forward in the hours that are to come, you'll get a greater sense of the power of having your valve open. In other words, let's say that here you are, you're 3 years old, and you're horsing around with your little cousin in your mother's living room, and you knock over something very precious and valuable to her. And when she discovers this broken whatever it is, her heart is breaking because she feels lack of money and knows that she can't just go right out and buy another one of those. And even if she could, she doesn't know where she'd find it. In other words, she's sort of been trained with the valve-closing attitudes of the society. So with her valve closed tight, she shakes her finger at you and tells you how naughty you are, which closes your valve and sends you off to your room until you learn how to behave differently. And in that moment, you begin to vibrationally begin to make those patterns. And the pattern is, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, there's not enough money. In other words, there's a whole bunch of vibrational stuff that you start picking up on. In other words, your little light bulb starts blinking, right? And then usually you start breaking more things because the spotlight has been shined on that, you see. So what we're getting at here is that as you move through your society, most of you learn from each other valve closing techniques rather than valve opening techniques. And that's this whole new philosophy that we're trying to offer to you here, is to assist you in understanding that so many of those things that you all think are so important are not important relative to the opening of the valve. And he's there to teach that to you.
That's perfect. That's clear. Then do you agree, or would you say that it's best to keep him at home and continue to homeschool, as it's called, and keep him away from the mainstream educational system so that they don't close his valve anymore?
In other words, we would do everything we can to assist him in keeping his valve open, which means the happier he is, the better off he is, and the more likely he's going to learn. Okay. And if you put him into a school system where they're already trying to pigeonhole the kids that they've already decided are sort of normal, you can imagine the frustration they're going to feel when they behold him. And what could be worse for him than to be held as the object of a closed valve attention?
Yes.
You see what we're getting at?
Yes.
And plus the other day, Jerry and Esther were in Ohio, and they had gone to the swimming pool in the hotel, and a little boy joined them. And Esther wondered where his parents were, but they didn't seem to be anywhere around, and he got in the water with them. And Jerry stood on his head under the water and did somersaults in the water and did all sorts of things to entertain the little one. And then Jerry got out of the swimming pool and standing on the edge, just dropped gently head first back into the water. Well, the little boy climbed up the ladder of the swimming pool and just throwing a fit, stood out there pointing at the words that were written on the side of the pool, and he said, "No diving, no diving, no diving, no diving." Esther thought he was going to spin himself in. He was so worked up. No diving, no diving, no diving. He could not stand that a rule that he was told he should not break. Here somebody was breaking that rule, you see. And the injustice of it just was enveloping him. So what we're getting at here is that so many of you have been, in other words, nothing is more frustrating than the want to do something that somebody tells you you're not supposed to be able to do. The reason we bring this up here is because if your little one goes to school and is not keeping up with the standards of the others, their frustration is going to, in other words, they're going to look at him and say, "No diving." In other words, he's not doing what you're making us do. And so he will constantly be the object of closed valve attention. Now here's something that you're wanting to begin to teach him right away. And that is, and he will understand it as you understand it and express it gently, he'll get it. Really. Good for all of you to say. If somebody is mistreating you or misbehaving, they're rude to you, they don't acknowledge you, they don't appreciate you, they might even be saying harsh things to you, a very good thing for you to say to yourself is, his valve must be closed, otherwise he would love me. Because then what you realize is it's not about you. It's about his valve. Well, in a sense, that's what we'd like to say to society. Society's valve must be closed, otherwise they'd appreciate who your son is, you see. Now, why is anybody's valve closed? Why would somebody say, "No, no, not that"? It's because they feel vulnerable to that. So in order to stop feeling vulnerable to something asserting itself, you have to know how to flow energy. Well, society is not going to understand that anytime soon. In other words, society is afraid of people that are different because they are insecure within themselves. That's what we were talking about earlier. If you didn't have some vibrational connection to it, you wouldn't be feeling it so strongly, you see. So if we were standing in your physical shoes, here's what we would do. We would look for every opportunity to appreciate this magnificent being who has come forth as pure positive energy into your physical experience. And the more you appreciate him, the more your valve will be open as you hold him as your object of attention. And the more his valve will then be open to inspire him to the fulfillment of his desire. But let us tell you, don't get your desire for him mixed up with his desire for him.
How do I know what his desire is? How will he let me know?
When you are pushing him beyond his desire, you will see evidence of frustration. Okay. You'll see his valve closing. If you saw someone on your sidewalk bleeding, wouldn't you do what you could to help them? If you saw someone in your swimming pool drowning, wouldn't you do whatever you could to help him? When you see people with their valves closed, you usually shout back at them. It's an interesting thing. And when their valves are closed, they need your assistance more than if they were bleeding or drowning. And yet when their valves are closed, usually they're attacking you. So you get defensive, and then your valve closes and you attack back. And then you're just a bunch of disconnected people banging around together, you see. When you are able to say, they wouldn't be acting that way if their valves were open, then it gives you a broader, clearer understanding of what your mission is, which will help you to understand what your son's mission is. He is a teacher of unconditional love because he is a projector of unconditional love. He didn't come here to be loved. He came here to love, you see. And that's what most of you get mixed up about. You think, why? Jerry and Esther were watching a television program the other day. It was Oprah, and Jerry had it on, and sort of accidentally, as Esther walked into the room, and Jerry said, "Look, Oprah is crying," and so Esther wanted to know what had reached her. And what was the title of the program? Can you remember? It was about eating disorders, and there was a woman there who was weighing about 47 pounds, and still not wanting to eat. And there was a counselor counseling her who was saying, "You're going to die." She was trying to shock her into a different behavior. And Esther walked out of the room. She said, "I can't listen to this," because she could see that everything that counselor was saying to that woman was part of the reason that the woman was withdrawing in this way. And so they only watched a few minutes of it, and then Esther turned it off and asked us what we were thinking about it. Because what it is, again, is someone living something different from what society says they should live. And what we want them to understand about it is that, and it comes back to this business of the valve closing, and back to this business of when people's valves are closed, you usually want to shout at them rather than help them. All right, this is a very important essence of where almost everyone that you will ever meet is standing. So let us hit it here, and then we'll amplify it so you can understand it relative to where you are with your little one. Since almost no one has taught you how to flow energy, but you have been taught to observe conditions. So right from your earliest age, you focus on this condition, which may be a valve closing position, and you focus upon this condition, which may be a valve opening condition, but you feel no control in the conditions. And what happens with that is that so many of you, because you are not aware of how you can deliberately focus and open your valve, you become dependent on your valve being open by other people appreciating you. So the idea of what others think becomes very, very important. So important that many of you get very much off balance to the degree that what they think of you is so important that you rarely even have any free thoughts of yourself. In other words, you're viewing yourself almost completely through the eyes of others. Well, that's a pretty debilitating thing, because there are so many of them out there with their valves closed. And nobody said to you, if their valve was open, they would love you. And so what you begin to do as individuals is you begin to try to modify your behavior in order to be appreciated by more people. But in doing that, there is a furthering diminishment of your own sense of well-being. In other words, your valve just closes more and more and more and more and more. Well, this is what your son has come forth to help with. He's come forth to say, hey, I'm exuding pure positive energy, and I'm very different from, in other words, he's come forth to defiantly say, I don't need your approval, in order to help so many of those that are so caught up in the belief that they need to be approved of before things can go well. Is this making some sense to you?
Perfect sense, yes.
We want so much to help all of you to understand that if you could get your valve, if you could let your valve be your top priority, that in about a month of monkeying around with your valve, the approval of other people would matter not at all. And we think that most of the concern that you're feeling about how your son grows and thrives has to do with how he will be perceived by other people. And we have to tell you, it's not nearly as important to him as it is to you. And what he's come forth to teach you and so many others, like this young woman who is so much wanting the approval of others. She thought she was fat even when she was not. So her desire for approval became more powerful than her desire for survival. So she is literally starving herself to death or disallowing her body any food because her desire to please others who believe that skinny is the way to be and fat is not the way to be, that desire to find approval of others has superseded even her desire for survival. And we say, what your true desire is to have your valve open so that you continue to thrive in all ways, you see. We'd like all of you to reach the point that you could look at anyone and say, look at me, aren't I great? And if they said, no, you're fat, or you're too skinny, or you're too tall, or you're the wrong color, or you're the wrong religion, or you have the wrong economic background, as they're spewing all of their disapproval at you, you just say, his valve must be closed, otherwise he'd be loving me. In other words, you acknowledge that you cannot stand on your head in enough different ways to please any one of them, let alone all of them, you see. That's why we hammer so much about the valve, is because it's the first time that it puts you in a vibrational place of letting who you really are come forth. That's why he hums. That's why he rocks. In other words, that's his realignment back into that energy of well-being, you see. And as he expresses that into the physical, if you could not see it as abnormal behavior, you could actually find yourself humming and rocking with him. It is really delicious, you see. Truly.